Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. Let's talk about the sedentary work game that disability carriers or plans play at the any occupation stage of an ERISA disability claim. Now, generally, what you will see is that after 2 years of being paid your own occupation benefits, the definition of disability will change from an inability to do your own occupation to an inability to do any occupation. And often that means a job at what's called a sedentary level, which is basically sitting down all day. Now, some policies will require that the new occupation generate at least 80% of your pre-disability earnings, but many don't. And so one of the things that we need to understand here is what's the definition of any occupation. We need to understand whether the definition has a new occupation disability income threshold. In other words, that 80% of your pre-disability earnings. Because we've got to understand the parameters of what it is we have to prove. But before we take that apart, let's talk about what sedentary means. Sedentary typically means sitting for up to 6 hours in an 8-hour workday, walking or standing for no more than 2 hours per day, lifting no more than 10 pounds, and the use of both hands. That's called bilateral manual dexterity, and sufficient vision for small object tasks. It also requires the ability to maintain pace and production throughout the workday. The game that occurs is that the disability carrier or plan is going to have your medical records reviewed by their liar-for-hire peer review doctors, who are going to conclude, notwithstanding what your doctor has to say, that you can engage in some form of sedentary work. Then their in-house vocational rehabilitation counselor, VE, will identify sedentary jobs that they claim you can do, regardless of whether those jobs are available in your local labor market and even pay a living wage. Many times that's not a factor. It's not a factor of whether you like the job, whether it pays a living wage, whether it's necessarily even available. That's not the clue. It's in this hypothetical mythical world, is there some other work that you could do? Now, part of what the vocational evaluator is doing is determining what skills you have that might transfer to a sedentary job. So they do a transferable skills analysis and say, okay, they've got these 10 transferable skills, but now let's put it in the sedentary work bucket, occupation bucket, if you will. And that will help kind of filter out jobs, if you will, that are not either sedentary in nature or consistent with your level of skills. I see all sorts of stupid jobs that disability carriers, vocational evaluators will come up with. But here's the game. You've got to attack this opinion if your claim has been denied or terminated. There are two things you have to do at a minimum. First, you've got to rebut the physician, the liar-for-hire physician's opinion about your restrictions and limitations. One of the ways we go about doing that is to have a functional capacity evaluation, which is an objective measure of a person's functionality. I want to measure objectively your ability to do those sedentary type duties that we enumerated at the beginning of this segment. Can you sit? How long can you sit? Do you have to change positions? How much can you lift? Do you have to alternate sitting, standing, or other postural changes? Do you, in fact, have postural issues with moving your head side to side or up and down? Do you have difficulties using your hands in a bilateral fashion? Would you have problems with pace and attendance? We generally will try to take that back to the treating physician and say, hey, do you agree with this functional capacity evaluation? And by the way, do you disagree with what the liar-for-hire doctor has to say? Now, what's important also here in the course of this case is that you're giving your doctor an accurate history of your symptoms and functionality, how long you can sit, stoop, walk, stand, that sort of stuff. And also giving your doctor an accurate history of how your symptoms impact concentration, pace, the ability to stay on task, the need for breaks, repetitive limitation issues. That's crucial because all of this needs to be consistent. Has to be consistent with what you're telling the carrier, consistent with what you're telling the doctor, and consistent with that functional capacity evaluation. Then in turn, we want to have our vocational evaluator take apart this whole notion that either you can engage in sedentary occupations by virtue of your physical restrictions, limitations, or attack the transferable skills analysis that the VE did and argue that your restrictions and limitations have eroded or reduced your ability to do even the stupid sedentary occupations that the carrier or plan has come up with. You can see that this is very strategic and it's individualized based on what's happening in your particular case. Please don't let disability carriers or plans wrongfully deny your benefits. You should be seeking legal guidance to challenge these wrongful vocational assessments. You're only going to have basically 180 days in which to file an appeal in an ERISA case. That's the trial of your case. That's when all of this evidence gets developed. Because once the appeals process is ended and the claim potentially is denial is upheld, there's no new evidence that can be added before you file a lawsuit. So you've got to develop this during, preferably before your claim is denied or terminated, but certainly during the appeal process. And the failure to do so can be fatal to the outcome of your case. Got it? Let's take a break.